It's time to rip the cover off what really works to ditch addiction, depression, anger, anxiety, and all other kinds of human suffering. No, not sobriety. We're talking the F word here, freedom. We'll share straight from the trenches what we've learned from leaving our own addictions behind and coaching hundreds of others to do the same. And since it's such a heavy topic, we might as well have a good time while we're at it. Welcome back to our book club, folks. Today is chapter 3, or adventure number 3, The Weight of a Dime in Built for Freedom. I know. You're getting it a week at a time, and we're going deeper into some things, and we're making jokes that are outside of it. Hopefully, this additional content to the book is enriching, the process of reading and maybe giving you a few things extra to think about as we do it. So this is chapter 3. Do you want to lead this discussion there, Lee?
This chapter is huge and kind of setting a really big foundation as far as the freedom process and the things that we do at retreats and the idea of how emotions impact the body. And you bring up a lot of different evidence in here about the amount of pressure it takes to impact a cell and all of that. But then it goes into the story of you meeting Alexei, which is pretty foundational. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So Alexei Sapronov, you can find him online. I think I don't know his website offhand. But he comes from a line of like all of these Russian martial arts that I've trained in, among all the other martial arts that I've trained in and stuff. And back in 2014, Mikhail Ryabko, he came to the United States and to Las Vegas, and I drove out there through the Joshua Tree Forest as the sun was setting on the prickles, right? Whatever. And I stayed at a friend's house who happened to be out of town, so I was Airbnb for free, some.
That sounds like the part in the movie Elf where he goes to the sugar plum thing.
In the land of the airy fairy gumdrops or something. Yeah. And so I was there, and it was at some rec center in Las Vegas, and I was training Systema, and I had just started training in this particular martial art. I've been training martial arts since I was about 8, and all of them had been built on fear in a big way. Don't get hit here, don't get locked there, destroy the other guy. A lot of it was built on fear and outwitting and being superior. And this was the first approach. I had been introduced to it by my Tai Chi teacher, who was also one of the first Systema instructors around. And who had also written some of the early books on Systema. And he introduced me to it, and he was like, look, Vladimir, he has it. So you should check this out. So I started checking it out, and these were people that were directly confronting fear and recognizing that people get afraid and that they have pain. And then what you do is you just figure out how to be free of it instead of just let it fuel you. It's like the dark side versus the light side of the force. Let your feel the hatred, as opposed to stepping outside of it and operating in a more clean way. And one of my early Systema teachers, he was French, and so he was always like, you have to be emotionless, you have to aim well and do your work and don't make poo-poo face and all these things, right? And he's a good friend of mine. And so I went to Las Vegas. He was there, actually, my friend was, and it was a big one because Ryabko is the teacher's teacher. So the grand poobah, babushka, maybe. Babushka. What is the male version of the babushka?
I think it's babushkam.
And so he was there, and he was going to spend 2 days. And so I'm at the seminar. I'm like, I'm going to learn from the top dog. And it was deep, internal work. We were doing really subtle things that were, hiding a knife and stabbing 3 people without the without the fourth person knowing. And how do you do this? And really deep stuff, right? And in the middle of it, he had just brought along this sort of sideshow act who was he does this Systema massage, this stick work, which was the foundation of what I started from after that and started learning and toying with. And he was through a translator telling us it's really good for releasing childhood wounds. And I was like, okay, sign me up. So I forked over the $100 or $150 or whatever it was. And I got in line for the next day. And then I laid down on the ground next to a friend, and he worked the two of us over for 45 minutes to an hour. And we had to stand on this really spiky mat at first. And then I laid down, and he jammed antlers in between each of my ribs and whipped me with his whip and dug deep with his sticks inside of all of these different muscle areas and rammed a huge stick up underneath my rib cage and stood on the front and the back and The whole
I thought
time.
you were going to say butthole.
No. I don't remember that part. I could have PTSD. And in the middle of it, he was just gentle, calm voice. He was doing his praying in Russian, and which I only came to understand was praying later. He was just muttering something in a language that I don't understand. So I was like, okay, but this gentle convo, he's like, relax fingers, and oh yeah, it's relax arm and neck, shoulders, yeah, and he's like, oh, this good system, man, and it was all about becoming a really strong warrior. I didn't have any emotional releases. I didn't have any huge cathartic stuff. I had some sadness thing come up. I had some fears come up. Worries about not being strong enough and whatnot. And I got up from that and I was like, wow, that was really intense. My wife was like, why would you pay someone to do that? But things changed for me from that day forward. It had given a physiological context to my life that helped me to see in a very bare bones, undeniable way that nothing that I thought was a problem was as big as that. And that everything that I was dealing with was actually a lot smaller than what I thought it was. And a huge context, if a tiger attacks you in the morning, in the afternoon, you really don't care if someone sent you an angry email. So it changed a lot of things. And I started exploring, what is this? And he disappeared. He went back to Latvia where he lived at the time. And so I was just exploring this. I was starting to use punching and I started mapping it in my body, which muscles hold which things and what are the emotional states that happen. My wife told me that I started finishing projects better and that I was treating the kids without so much angry eruption, and that there was just something that had changed in my demeanor from that experience. And so as I continued to try and map it out and within myself and try and work with the kids and learn more, he eventually came back. And then over time, I went and trained with him several times for, multiple days at a time to really kind of understand and learn what it was he was doing. And by then I had developed a lot of my own ways of addressing this direct link between emotional states and physical states. What's interesting though, is that it was a sort of a step of departure from what they were doing. So the Russians don't seem to be really interested in emotion. They kind of want you to be sort of semi-emotionless in order to operate and function in the world, which you would want to be in terms of being a spy and whatnot. Not catatonic, not numb like with a lot of the soldiers in the U.S. They want it to be clean and how you clean yourself from it. And I think that culture has been through so much that a lot of them have to have that kind of stoic view. Even now, still, they just kind of deal with life as it comes, many of them. And so none of them are really directly targeting emotional states or, mental health issues or anything like that. And so I was kind of pioneering or trying to develop a way to use that, and other methods to directly address, I am depressed, or I am suicidal, or I feel like I'm a worthless piece of dung and I was made that way. How do I address that inside the system? And that's where I started really looking at how different muscles and the way that they tense form the basis of the thoughts that then we latch onto.
There's a point in this chapter where you start to talk about Brody and Brody's story and how you grab his arm, and there's a response there. And it's significant for me, on this side, being part of the guides that help with the retreats and stuff like that. It's I know these people. I was there when you grabbed Brody's arm. And there's other people in the book that these are real people. And this isn't just philosophy or pie in the sky ideals. These are things that I've seen you work out with people in their body. And
this chapter packs a wallop in terms of a lot of stories packed in, for sure. There's Chase, who's dealing with abandonment and betrayal from divorce. There was Kiri with her panic attacks and her anxiety. There was Brody with his, he had come for one reason, and that came up in terms of, a past experience with an old girlfriend and whatnot. There's Aaron, whose son had committed suicide and he was still blaming himself for it, and he was dealing with grief and loss. There was Lori Kay, who was just anxious about life and having her do. There's a lot of stories in this chapter.
Yeah, and you use that all to say that when we're dealing with the body, it's where we see movement. And right before you start talking about angustia in the body, you say, which is why so many people come home from therapy feeling like $1 million and then wonder why old feelings keep coming back. They haven't yet dealt with the entire person. That means the body itself and not just the mental, emotional byproducts.
Yeah.
Which is huge.
Yeah, it is. And this is where we introduce the idea of angustia, right? What I tried to do was coin a term, and I didn't coin the term, but I borrowed a term that's not in usage so that we could talk about this thing and not have it be confused with what other people are talking about. I don't remember who it was that was like, oh, I've tried exercise. Jeff, we're talking about people on the phone. We're like, no, we're dealing with, what is it that we're dealing with? If I just say tension in the body, they go, no, I know, I relax and I do yoga and I do this thing. But if we can talk about specifically what we're referring to with a term that nobody has sullied with other ideas, now we can make some new headway, right? And so I borrowed an old Latin term called angustia, and it just comes from a term that means something tight or constricted or narrow. And it can refer to mental states. It can refer to emotional states. It can refer to landscape, like a tight passage. And so it's really just a term that I'm borrowing to try and allow us to step outside of the arena that we've been in before and really talk directly about what's going on in the body, which is the bulk of what people are dealing with. I call them byproducts in that passage you read, that thoughts and emotions are byproducts of a state of the body. And we really harped on that in this retreat with the guys, that like your brain is not connected to the outside world at all. Not at all. It's seeing everything through the lens and filter of the body. So even if the outside world is beautiful, all that beauty has to go through whatever you've got inside your system before it reaches your brain. And then your brain makes sense of it. And if it's muddied, I mean, I don't know many people that like swimming in a pool that some kid peed in. And if that's what's going on, like, okay, you got pee in the pool somewhere, and then, oh, wow, this other thing jumps in. You're still jumping out of the pool. It doesn't matter how beautiful the lifeguard was, or this is a really poor analogy, guys. Somebody should have stopped me earlier. But the point is, like, if you have tension in the body, if you have poor chemistry, I'm not talking about chemical imbalances as a diagnosis. I'm just, because your chemistry changes all day long with everything that happens. And when we're talking about the weight of a dime, that is how much pressure scientists were researching determined, like it just that much was enough to make a cell divide faster, to change the function of a cell. But that was spread out. It was an actual dime. So that was spread out over however many 100,000 cells were underneath that dime. So it's like a tiny fraction of the weight of a dime, which is needed to change the function of any cell. And so if you consider that much pressure, everything that affects everything outside of you affects you in some way, shape, or form. The pressure of light beams on your system. We call them triggers. I saw something and it triggered me. That's just pressure on the retina in a certain pattern that your brain recognizes. And so that much pressure starts to change tension patterns in the body, changes chemistry, changes cell function and cell division, and all of these other things. And that's what we're dealing with. And so that term is what I decided to use.
Yeah, I think it's been really helpful for me. The way I see it is like thinking about interpretation or something. Like I'm interpreting these events, and when there's tension places, I have the habit of interpreting things more negatively. And so instead of, giving myself a pep talk or something to try to get rid of these negative interpretations that I can see are negative and I can see are not helpful, this like hack or stupid human trick or this workaround or not workaround, but like actually dealing with something that works, like a method for that is just relaxing and learning a bunch of different ways to pinpoint where I want to relax, and then just noticing what that does to my interpretation of events. And it's like mind blowing. Like it really, really has been a huge switch. And also, like, you talk about how tension is not the big bad guy, that we need to eliminate all tension from our bodies, because if we had no tension, then we couldn't stand up. It's about being like reading your instruments, like doing some preventative maintenance every once in a while and checking, the jet or parts of the things so that you think, oh yeah, this isn't functioning the way I would like it to function. And then doing some breathing or doing some movement to get it lubricated and back working and interpreting the way that I like, that is supportive to my health and my family's health, that sort of thing.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about exercise, right? Exercise is putting tension on the body. And the end result of it, if done well with enough breath and everything else to where you're not keeling over like Tucker sometimes.
Tucker goes hard.
But you've experienced both sides of that, right? But if you put tension on the body, the end result is, okay, cool, you've pushed the body negative, and then it overbalances positive, and the end result is, hey, I have this great feeling that lasts with me for a while. I mean, you just went running yesterday because it had been a couple of days. We're in the middle of a retreat, and he just took a moment to go take care of himself with tension in a big way. And so, it's not that it's bad. It's that if you don't know how to use it right, you can fly into a volcano.
If you or someone you know is looking to drop the F-bomb of freedom in their life, whether that's from past trauma, depression, anxiety, addiction, or any other host of emotional and personal struggles, but they just don't know how or want some help doing it, head on over to thefreedomspecialist.com/feelbetternow and check out some of the things we've got in store for you, or book a call so we can look at your unique situation and get you the help that you're looking for.
So, Tucker, you are on the beginning of all of this, and we're probably one of the first guys to receive stick work.
He was the first.
Yeah, the first guy. And then you've also watched the evolution of this over the last few years. And as the stick work has been developed and dealing with angustia and watching Bob with us, what do you have to offer about that whole process?
The stick work specifically?
Yeah.
Or even some of the stuff you were
something like about. I've had the opportunity to go through a lot of different things with the Freedom Specialist, with Bob specifically from the beginning. When I was looking at the possibility of working with Bob as like a partner in the business, not just as a client, I remember flying out to Utah and meeting him for the first time. And Bob saw me and was kind of shocked because
I thought he was going to be this like 5'10", sandy-haired, corduroy pant wearing like English professor type. I was wrong, guys.
And so this was the beginning, and like meeting him for the first time in person, and kind of looking beyond just the online program that I had just gone through. And I'd been introduced to breath work, but not a whole lot of the movement piece yet. So the body aspect of the work that we do here was not in place yet, at least not on the scale that it would eventually. And so I remember the first day, the only day I was there actually working with you, we're in a park and we were working with a client who was struggling at the time, and all of a sudden there's some striking, like martial arts striking, and getting punched in the chest and like movement and things, and I'm just floored, like what's happening, like what are we doing? And I avoided it as much as I could. I'm like, I'm not going to go there. Like I could feel like this emotion welling up like deep inside, like there was something there, and I waited intentionally. Not knowing Bob clearly at the time.
For reference, the guy that we were dealing with he had almost committed suicide the night before. And so like he had just called it, he wasn't actually a client. He was somebody who had been thinking about like getting some help with us.
Yeah.
And he was just like freaking out. And I was like, I don't care if you've paid or not. Why don't you meet me in the park and let's change this? And he hasn't committed suicide at all.
Yeah.
It changed a lot of things, even though he was like, one day I'm going to come and punch you back, like it changed a lot of things for him in that space. But Tucker didn't have necessarily all that context.
Well, I didn't. And so just like wondering what's going on, and waited like, I'm not going to get punched. I'm not going to go through this. I'm going to wait until we're walking out of the park to the car. And so I just kind of like half-heartedly like, oh yeah, I could feel something come up, but we'll look at it later. You don't look at anything later with Bob. Let me do it right now. So like even before we got to the car, okay, well, let's do it. So I remember standing there, and, Bob with his martial arts background, just so it doesn't seem like this random punch flying out of nowhere, like got me in the chest and in the back. And I remember I keeled over, not from pain, but the emotion, and just like bawled my eyes out. And to give some context, growing up, I was what my mom said, it's, this soft-hearted kid. And so I wore that label almost like a badge of honor. But I remember I cried a lot and like processed emotions, and it wasn't good or bad. It's just like I used to cry a lot more.
Sounds like your son a little bit.
Yeah. And I did not cry at all for a number of years. Maybe in a really good emotional movie, maybe in a moving song, but very like couldn't recall. And here I am.
Aside from listening to Justin Bieber, you hadn't cried.
Yeah, exactly. So
leave Justin Bieber out of this.
So I'm here crying and like all this stuff is coming up. And in that moment, I'm like, okay, there's something here. And it took some physical action to make this happen, but there's something here. So fast forward, specifically to the stick work, and I'll talk very briefly about the breath work too, but like the stick work, I'm in a room, it's our third retreat, and I was kind of the stick work demo for this retreat, and I'm on the floor in front of, I think, probably 20, 25 guys. And Bob's walking me through this process. And by the way, there's a video that you can watch. You can actually see me go through this.
Yeah, it's on the freedomspecialist.com/bodywork.
Yep.
So you can actually watch the video that we put together. And that is Tucker's first time, guys. So just so you know.
Yeah, so you can see. And even I think, honestly, it was like as soon as the sticks hit my back, even before there was like any pressure applied, I broke down and I cried. And I can't remember the exact comment, but it's like, are you holding it? Because it was my daughter, my relationship with my daughter was your daughter and your shoulders. And no, she's not. And I'm, sitting there processing, but it was, I had gotten to the threshold and the sticks were the thing that pushed me through that threshold. And so I'm processing this, difficult relationship that I've had with my daughter. And I'm, again, crying my eyes out in front of a room full of men and young adults. And I'm sitting here unaware that they're even in the room. So I'm in this space. And I don't know if you asked like what that experience was like for me, but again, it was another situation where it was like I had felt so much built up. And at that point, I wasn't processing things. So these were the moments of processing. And they were huge, even though they were fairly quick, like these moments that finally allowed me to step over that threshold. And I dumped years in that 20, 30 minutes. Of relationship issues, of fears of being, a negligent, hurtful father, of not being a good husband, because I had some sticks in my back. And as Bob kind of talked the group through that and walked me through that experience, I came out of that, and you can hear me talk about this in the video, just with like this clean feeling. Like I felt clean. I felt like I had just let go of a lot of weight. And so I think that's one of the things that I wanted to kind of point out specifically in this episode and this chapter. We're talking about all these different stories, but this chapter really dives into the host of different experiences, life experiences, and challenges that our clients come to us with. Yeah, we focused a lot on pornography in the beginning. That's what I came for. We've had people that have dealt with spousal abuse, parental abuse. We've had people that have dealt with rape issues. We've had really deep trauma and, the gambit of mental health diagnoses, which myself included in that, drug issues and prescription drug, just confusion of being prescribed medication and dealing with those things. And again, my experience there as well, but it really dives into that. And so you get to start to see like, well, is there something here for me? And I've had multiple clients at this specific retreat, the most recent one that we just wrapped up, that have said like, this is for everyone. Like, it doesn't matter, like, if I have these big, like, life-defining problems, like, this is for everyone. And I think as you read through the book, you'll see why. And I mean, maybe some intention there, too, with the way you wrote this, yes, so that it feels accessible to everyone, not to just one specific issue.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure that I had the widest possible range of examples so that somebody listening didn't go, oh, well, that's not my issue, so I still have to keep looking, because we're all dealing with the body. I mean, in order to be alive on the planet, you have to have a body, as far as I know. I mean, I'm not familiar with anyone who doesn't have a body. So far, as far as I know, like, you have to have a body. So let's learn to use it in a really profound way. And I think one thing I want to point out here is that with the stick work particularly, which is just basically angustia release. That's all it is. We're training the nervous system. It's not massage. Like, the way that I've worked it and developed it and added to it and tweaked it and adjusted it from what I received from my teachers is one that is calculated toward teaching the nervous system to completely release its habit of squeezing itself unnecessarily wherever possible. And there might be more possible than I know yet, but at least what I know is possible. So which is a lot. And so that's what we've done. But one of the things that helps that isn't just coming and getting some body work done, but the entire context. When they talk about psychedelics, and these depression therapies that they're using with therapists and whatnot, these scheduled substances with psilocybin and MDMA and ketamine, they talk a lot about what they've found to be useful with psychedelics, which is set and setting, which is the intention behind it and the setting in which it occurs. And while I think some of that stuff could use an upgrade based on what we've found, Tucker and I've talked a lot about that in our own experience with things. The context of the retreat in a place where there are a lot of other people looking at things in a very particular way, where these particular bodywork sessions are stacked on top of, we're doing breath work and we're also doing movement and we're also eating certain things that are beneficial for the system or supportive of the system in a different way. And then we're also like listening to some audios, or like we're doing some movement work, or we're sitting still for periods of time and doing some meditative stuff, or learning to use our vocal. All of that stuff combines to create an environment where these types of things can happen in a big way. And people come to me sometimes for this type of work just on their own. And so, cool, I'll do some, but it's never the same. I still try to send them, here's some things I want you thinking about before we come. Here's some intentions I want you to set. And they have a great experience, but it's nothing like what we create here because of the environment in which it happens as well.
In my own experience, I feel like as I came to the retreat that you kind of introduced me to my own body. You're like, Lee, here's your body. This is how it works.
I'm a nobody. I'm a nobody. Now I'm a somebody.
Yeah, but I didn't know what I didn't know, right? I didn't know that things could change as quickly as they could. I didn't know that I didn't have to be carried away by my thoughts. I didn't know that I could challenge those things, or I could challenge the way I felt, or that I could change those things in a matter of moments. Mm-hmm. I was 52 years old and I did not know these things. The journey towards healing that I had been taught was all in the head. Yeah. All in the brain. Talk about it.
Which has its value. We don't want to negate that, right? What your brain says does affect the body, and so you can change it that way too.
It got me to a point, right, where I could see clearly, well, retrospectively, not so clearly, but I thought I saw clearly what was happening, but I really didn't see what was happening. And it was a grace and a gift to help me challenge those things and to learn that I could, and to give me those tools. But it started in the body work, and it was really confusing to me because like how am I going to get better by feeling pain or feeling pressure, But on the other side,
by the way, Lee, when he went through his, was like trash talking me. He was sitting there like, "Is that all you've got, little man?" He was like getting back at me.
13-year-old. Yeah, exactly. See, exactly.
13-year-old effeminate man. He was getting back at me in advance for the voice.
Yes, that's right.
Which is wild because people are down with surgery. It's like, what's more violent than that? And it does produce healing,
Yeah, like that's true. That's a good point.
It's like, this is super. I mean, it was off-putting for me when I saw Chris first go through stick work on that first thing. I was like, what is this place? Like, this is so violent.
Which is why we want you to watch the video in advance.
But I do think, the amount of physical abuse I experienced as a child was given with a different intent than the intention that happens when we're in this place working with the body. And one of the things that I learned through your intention for my healing was I was a lot stronger than I thought I was. Mm-hmm.
We had somebody this retreat even who came beforehand. He'd seen the demonstration that we do, the first night, and he openly vocalized how much he was afraid of pain. And he's like, "What if all I do is experience just pain and pain and pain?" And I was like, "Look, you'll feel the difference." And there's no way to describe it. Like, it looks from the outside like it might be something that's super painful, but on the inside, it's a very different experience because it's informed by a different intention. And I wish I could communicate it better, for sure. But we do have a lot of people that watch Tucker's video and they see it, and there's something inside them that goes, "Oh, I really need to do this." And they might be scared and they might not, but something about that process clicks in a very visceral way with a lot of people.
I want to make this point before I lose it, but in the talking through my problems and the narrative theory and all the counseling that I went through, it was good to a point, but there came a point where I was re-traumatizing myself. Like, the things weren't still happening to me, and I've learned since then that the only way that those incidents and memories and stories were harming is I was recreating them re-traumatizing myself and putting my body through that angustia over and over and over and over. And it wasn't until I came to Freedom Retreat that I was able to actually set those things aside, which I didn't ever think that I could do. I thought this was a lifelong thing.
Which is the diagnosis.
Yeah, and nobody else was telling me that. Like if you're in a 12-step group, you're an addict for the rest of your life. You're a sex addict, alcohol, or whatever. And there was no one telling me that this would ever go away. And so I was a good soldier, and I would tell my story and re-traumatize myself.
Yeah, and I think a point here with that one that I try to make in the book, or a way to make that visible, is like your heart functions on tension. Like it's muscle contractions and all these other things, and your blood vessels have tension in them, and they run through the entire cardiovascular system, and it's how it functions. It's got a pump. It's a muscular pump in many ways. You got muscles in your bowels, you have muscles in your intestinal tract, your esophagus. You got muscles all over the place. Tiny little muscles in your eyeballs that are dilating and contracting your pupils. And so there's muscles all over the place. And so their function is great. You take a heart that's got muscular function, and then you add a little bit of a squeeze to it, some unnecessary tension. Imagine how that heart's going to function. It's got a little bit of a squeeze. Maybe it pushes the valve of one of the chambers of the heart off in a weird way, and then you get some weird arrhythmia going on, or a backflow into one of the things. It's just a little bit of a squeeze. That's an extreme example, but how many people are suffering from all these heart conditions that might not actually suffer from them because they're actually reversible, because it's just unnecessary tension that they think they need to take a prescription medication for, or get a pacemaker or something for, which maybe they don't. And I don't know that, right? I haven't been in all these surgeons' rooms and whatnot. But like that type of stress on the body, it's just imagine a heart beating. Now squeeze it, and that's what we're dealing with, is an extra squeeze on the system.
Lee, I'm curious about what you said as far as re-traumatizing, because that's like when my sister came to the retreat, when I was telling her about it, she was like, so you're punching, or Bob is punching people and having them.
I don't punch everybody. It sounds like it, but it's not the case.
And having these people use knives, sharp knives in drills, who are there because a lot of them have real trauma, were bullied, were like physically abused. Like that sounds exactly like re-traumatizing. And so it seems like there is, and I've heard you talk about like that we are re-traumatizing people in a way, or we're doing, if with this different understanding of what trauma is, maybe.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, like with that experience, like what was different about it when you would re-traumatize yourself telling your story at events versus when you came here?
There's an element of the re-traumatizing and telling your story of how you've been abused or harmed that brings those things back to life. And, and I've thought about this, like the trauma happened. And I
would challenge him on that one, folks, just so you know. The events happened.
The events happened.
Trauma is a different thing.
That we call trauma. And it was in the past, and it was done, and it was over. And when I would tell this story, I would bring all of that event forward, and it would experience the same angustia in my body, because our minds are so powerful, that I would recreate all those same feelings. Like I didn't have to do that.
This links to Quincy's story a little bit later, when you raped, all these things that happened as a kid and she forgot. And then later on in the book, I cover it. But basically all the 20 years since then were things that she had done to herself. And the event happened. That was something done to her. But all the after effect was something that she continued to do to herself, not maliciously, but because she didn't know any better. And she didn't know a way out. And she didn't realize that she actually had a say in whether she felt those things.
Yeah, and again, I'll go back to intent. Like the thing that initially happened to me was done out of a very hurting woman. There was no concern for me, and it was a hard thing to go through. And yet to come forward and really with Bob's intent towards my healing, to be invited back into that, and to be taught in that process that I wasn't a victim and that I could change something, kept me from re-traumatizing myself again. Because I didn't have to tell that story. I could let that story go.
And in the process, it is training. So what am I doing in the process? I'm telling them what to relax, and I'm telling them to breathe differently. I'm showing them where they're holding tension. So they are experiencing a similar, it's not the same, obviously, but a very similar experience, while in the process discovering that they actually have control over it, which rewires, in a sense, the brain's relationship to that. Like, oh, wait, I don't have to feel this anymore. Oh, wait, I can actually let that go. I didn't realize I could let that thing go. Oh, I can breathe different, and that changes something. And all of this is like body information sent up to the brain that it now has to make sense of and fit into a worldview. And sometimes that just, it makes it go like, oh, there's no Santa Claus? Okay, cool. I don't have to worry about being on the nice list next year. And so like that type of retraining of the nervous system in that moment, on top of the intention, on top of the context, on top of everything else, creates a different relationship to what they thought they were carrying.
So it's something like, because of what happened to you and because of this, what you've told yourself over and over again, you've created this groove that you go into.
Yeah.
And so then when Lee came to a retreat, you put him back in that groove
In a way,
and you showed him physically, here's an exit, here's an off ramp.
mm-hmm.
And he felt and he experienced that.
Well, I didn't even I didn't come to the retreat and talk about that at all.
No.
Like, we did not bring up that trauma. We did not talk about the specifics of it. I didn't tell you any details of it, but my body was in a place that I could feel the angustia that was similar to that point.
Yeah.
And then in that process, I could learn that I wasn't weak. I didn't have to be a victim to it, and I didn't have to live with it. I could let it go and I could move on.
Because all this stuff is built on the body anyway. So it's, since the thoughts are a byproduct, a little bit of pressure in that kind of angustia then opens a doorway.
And then I had a tool for whenever the thoughts of those experiences came up that I could take a look at that and let them go.
Yeah. And as an important note, I think in this discussion, most people's trauma, if they want to call it that, right? That kind of angustia or that kind of pattern that they're used to living with happens when the nervous system is in an amped up sympathetic state. And most healing methodologies happen when we've sedated the person. They're parasympathetic. They're calm. There's relaxing spa music. There's somebody woo-woo going, now open your third eye chakra and all the stuff. And I don't mean to make light of it because I'm a sucker for a lot of those things anyway.
Or just a therapy session, right?
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be the same? Like you're sitting in a comfortable chair.
Yeah, therapy session. We want to make the person safe. So we're going to validate all of their feelings and their opinions and just make them know that everything's okay. So that I found leads to table tarts on the table for 14 years because the trauma is in the sympathetic side of the nervous system. So if I can retrain it when the person is in a somewhat amped up state, and it doesn't have to be super amped up, sometimes just a little bit, all of a sudden that signals the mind to like, oh, wow, I don't actually have to go here. And if I do go here, I can find a way out. And it's a much quicker thing. And that's where we've seen people leave years and years and years and years and years of pain and struggle behind in just a few days.
Yeah, and I just want to make clear, like if even as you go through this book, like you do not have to go into the depths of that horrible story,
No,
whatever it was. And when you come to retreat, you don't go into the depths, and you're not sharing all the filth and all the things and all the all the ugliness of it all. You're not doing that. It's kind of setting that aside and dealing with what is actually there
in a playful, whimsical way with lots of different voices. And because Lee likes to hear my Chinese voice, I shall end this episode with an invitation to you guys to look deep into your soul and find your angustia and let it go.
I am not dealing with any of the emails that are coming from...
Anyway,
we like Asian people at Freedom Specialist.
I once had to re-record a training because I did that voice, and they're like, we don't want Chinese people to get offended. I am not out to offend Chinese people, only to have a good time in life. And I love all the Chinese people I've been around. They're great. They're fun. And they sound a lot like what I just did. Some of them. So there's that.
And that's it for today's Alive and Free podcast. If you enjoyed this show and want some more freedom bombs landing in your earbuds, subscribe right now at wherever you get your podcasts from. And while you're at it, give us a rating and a review. It'll help us keep delivering great stuff to you. Plus, it's just nice to be nice.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.